Hello, everyone. Hopefully not too much lunch has set in. But we are so fortunate right now because normally the people that attend this conference have typically been subsea, satellite, et cetera, and we have two people who are leading the industry in terms of the applications of these networks. So without further ado, we have Rami Katrib, who's the CEO of Digital Film Tree, and I'll let him describe his business because it's so fun. Most of you probably have never heard of this company, but Netflix is represented by Dave Temkin. They do sort of streaming video and DVDs by mail, I guess is really the main business. Mostly DVDs by mail, some CDs and 8-track tapes. Oh, Betamax, very cool.
It's going to win.
What happened to Alphamax?
Yeah.
Okay, so it turns out that Dave is now in charge of all networks. He was formerly on the distribution side. Now it's both everything from script to screen, I believe is the phrase. So I don't want to really take any time yammering because both these guys have incredible stories. So I'm going to let them talk about what they've been doing and where they're headed. And then we'll also open it up to questions and we'll have a nice little dialogue. So first, Rami, let me start with you because you just are right you're both in the thick of Oscar-winning productions and TV series and everything. So first of all, maybe talk a little bit about Digital Film Tree, especially in terms that people in this audience may not completely know what happens, how stuff gets to their screen, and then you can also talk about what you're doing, and then we'll get into you and then some questions.
Sure. I'll have you know that there's a DVD kiosks in our lobby.
There is. It's tough competition. I'm very worried about them.
I was
Edge
stunned
DVD.
to see it.
It's an Edge DVD architecture.
Yes.
Rather than having the latency involved with the mail,
Yes.
it's actually a distributed node that has
Yes.
the DVDs in it.
So Digital Film Tree started 18 years ago, and we were born right on the cusp of the TV and film process being physical, where you would shoot celluloid, you would cut it, you would glue it. The glue caused many people brain damage, including myself. And that's how I started. So fast forward 18 years, we transitioned from physical production to file-based with tools like Final Cut Pro and other desktop applications, technology like Firewire that commoditized the idea of bringing bits into a consumer computer and editing. And fast forward another 7 years, we are now involved in cloud-based workflows, which is based on the notion of centralizing the entirety of production assets, whether it's video, audio, even camera reports and sound reports and scripts, and put them in a centralized location so that you can derive efficiency. And although that sounds simple and logical, that is something that's taken years for the media and entertainment industry to engage. So now, the latest thing that I think is relevant to this audience is the simple notion of connecting productions to the internet, as silly as that might sound. So today, worldwide production does not use the internet in any meaningful way, right? Production personnel will use the internet for email and sending PDFs, but as of now, the vast majority of all the media and entertainment industry does not utilize the internet to traffic camera raw files. So to me, the next big thing for our industry is simply connecting productions on a worldwide basis to the internet.
So in effect, it's the same as everyone here has a digital camera, taking a digital camera, taking the SD card out of it, popping it in an envelope and mailing it, as opposed to what you would do with a phone, in effect, and just have it all happen either wirelessly and obviously.
100%. It's not uncommon if you have a production in Prague or Fiji for humans to take hard drives and fly back and forth to home base. That's a common scenario.
Are they hiring for that?
It's usually a production PA, so if you want to start working up through the grassroots, by all means.
I'll start with the Fiji assignment and we'll give back.
I mean, it's definitely a thing. You know, there's always been that old adage, which is started with never underestimate, you know, the bandwidth of a FedEx truck full of tapes.
Right.
It became a FedEx truck full of hard drives or whatever, a plane full of hard drives, or, you know, AWS, a semi-trailer full of hard drives. It's still absolutely that in the studio world. It is really hard to get this amount of data. You know the numbers better than I, but off the top of my head, it's like raw 4K is like 1.5 gigabits a second or something around that,
Yes.
right? And 8K is like 6?
Yes, and
like
some
that?
of your productions shoot at 8K.
Yes, so we're starting to shoot productions in 8K. But if I remember right, I was on a panel last year with some NTT folks who were talking about doing the Olympics in 8K. I think, weren't we? Was it
Yeah,
last
we
year?
actually had an 8K demo here maybe 2 or 3 years
was
ago.
2 years ago.
Where they had the 8K screen, and it's mind-boggling. It's
Yep.
reality can't hold a candle to 8K for sure.
Exactly. And so
But now it's becoming end-to-end because 8K TVs are starting to become available
they
on
are,
consumer.
but I don't think it's going to be the same consumer. At the end of the day, the consumer experience, I feel like we're going way off topic here, but the consumer experience is way more compelling with things like HDR
Yes.
than it is 4K versus 8K. At our collective age up here on stage, we can't tell the difference between 4K and 8K at anything closer than where he is sitting.
Although this is not
me.
an official Netflix position. This is just, you've heard.
I would just say in general, we think that 4K is great. We think that HDR is great. We don't have a specific strategy on 8K. We are capturing video in 8K where we can. We don't ever want to be caught out. If you look at content, great example would be look at The Sopranos or The Wire, 2 great HBO shows that were shot in the heyday when we first started going and capturing things digitally instead of on film. Unfortunately, those can't be remastered into 4K. They just kind of look like junk today. Whereas you have things that were made in the 80s and 70s that were captured on film, and you can then recapture those in 4K, and they look great.
Right.
And so we don't want to be in a spot in a few years where stuff that we captured at 4K looks like junk on some better forum.
Speaking of capturing and then delivery, maybe you could talk a little bit, because not everyone in the audience knows about Open Connect and knows about like what you're doing end to end, and everyone thinks all of Netflix runs in AWS. So maybe you could say a little bit about your use of the cloud, your use of co-location, because not everyone knows that process end to end.
Yep. So I used to say what Open Connect did, which is our content delivery network, was it was responsible for everything that happened after you press play, right? It was content delivery through and through. About a year and a half ago, we launched what we're calling internally FTL, Faster Than Light. What that is doing...
So, excuse me, before you go on.
Yep.
So everything after you press play, but the stuff that went on in AWS was like transcoding, recommendation engine?
Was transcoding the website, the UI, and UX experience in general, recommendations, all those things.
Even for like a smart TV or a mobile phone kind of interactive
the first
app.
stop for those devices was AWS. And then you press play, and a service in AWS gave you a URL that pointed to one of our content delivery nodes.
And the rationale for that is backhaul traffic reduction as well as latency improvement for the user experience, placing that at the edge in the appliance. Is that right?
As far as for content delivery, yeah. It was that we have this large scale, fiber networks have caught up where getting that close to the edge is not as important as just providing a lot of bandwidth. But at the end of the day, you never want to centralize that. You want that as close to the end user as possible. And so we've leveraged that to also now provide effectively edge offload for the application. So when a device goes to connect to AWS, it actually connects to our content delivery network, and we proxy that through. It's like SSL app acceleration stuff, like throw back to the 90s, but it still works really well. And so we're doing that. But also,
so just if I can just stop you,
Sure,
just to put this, because everyone uses Netflix. There's nobody in the world. They found the one person that doesn't use Netflix or doesn't watch Netflix, but they. When I scroll around and I'm looking for something to watch, I would imagine that the recommendations are calculated remotely in AWS, but the actual, let's say, the images, like the little thumbnails
we
that
still
are
call
the
those
movies.
box shots, even though most
Box
of the time
shots,
there's not a box that they're printed from.
That's from the Open Connect appliance, so that's local. So you're getting a combination of lower bandwidth, but more perhaps calculations required from the recommendation engine to do the homepage navigation, and then you're doing the actual caching of the images.
Exactly. Less than 1% of the data to an end user is coming from AWS.
Got it.
The bulk of the data is coming from our network.
If I'm not mistaken, when you transitioned to that framework, didn't you guys light up like 90 countries overnight?
Well, the two were separate. We had launched our own CDN a few years before that, but it was instrumental to launching a global product was having that CDN up and ready to go. And we did do a good job of putting a bunch of those nodes in countries stealthily while we hid the fact that we were about to launch a global product. I'm still very proud of our team and what they pulled off when we did that. But to your point, we realized, and exactly to your point, today, that workflow, the people getting on a plane in Fiji to take a briefcase full of discs to get that to a post-production house is incredibly inefficient. When we talk to people who are on the production side, not the people shooting, but the people who are the executives, the people who are doing post-work on this content, they value timeliness. And they want to be able to see what's going on in Fiji in real time if they can, or at least that night. Yep. And what happens today is, for things like that, they may massively compress what are called dailies so they can see, but it's not detailed. They can't work with that. It's still coming back in a briefcase, and send those over. And literally someone will sit there and babysit that upload.
I can see where this is going. So it's bring the presentation layer to the remote site rather than bring the data to the remote site. Is that?
Well, that's part of it, yeah.
Okay.
That's part of it. But it is also getting that high quality data back as quickly as possible from that production, so that it can be worked on, it can be studied, it can be analyzed. Sometimes you've got creative executives on 2 different coasts or in 2 different countries, and getting that back as quickly as possible has become one of the most important things that we can work on. And then finding places to store it and manipulate it and work on it. And so we figured that we could leverage a decent amount of the infrastructure we've deployed worldwide for that content delivery network to then create a network that we can use for getting that content in the first place.
Got it. So again, I'm going to open up for questions. So if you have a question, Rin, looks like it's Rin back there holding up the mic, just wave her down. And if I see her not there, then I'll know that somebody waved her down for a question. But you have an audience here that includes satellite and subsea providers. I know you had expressed some interesting challenges with respect to, you were sending back so much data from Fiji that it looked like a DDoS attack. So for both of you, what are you wrestling with on a daily basis that you wish these people would fix for you?
Well, like we're part of the production and post-production community. It's a commingling of creativity, creative folks, and technical folks. And the notion of speaking with an ISP, for example, completely different vocabulary, right? We don't understand each other. So I know that over the last few years, we've gotten better at understanding the vocabulary and negotiating deals for, certain ISPs have better pathways to certain regions, for example. But that is something that takes time. It took us time. So right now, one of the things we do in addition to post-production creative services is IP logistics, like holding productions by the hand and finding out what is the best last mile solution for the production in North Carolina, right? So the Fiji use case, we do a show called Wrecked in Fiji, and the first time we did that show, it was obscenely hard because it was at a resort. So, and the reason that Turner was doing the production in Fiji is because of tax incentives. So consider that the vast majority of television productions right now are incentive chasing, tax incentive chasing. So one night, the Fijian government woke up and said, we want to create a TV tax credit. Within months, they had a show. The problem was the internet. Do you want to fashion a guess for how much 100 megs of internet from Fiji is per month? Anyone?
Let's say
this is your area.
$30,000.
That's exactly right. We did not rehearse this
We didn't rehearse this at all.
So, but when you add the tax incentive, which is 50%, that's only 15,000. So when we did the calculation, that was cheaper than flying humans back and forth between Fiji and Los Angeles. So, and to Dave's point, that was a show where the editor was in London, the executives in charge were in Los Angeles, and 100 megs was all that we can afford, right? So we trickled a camera raw from Fiji back to Los Angeles while production is sleeping. We create the dailies process, which, as Dave said, is a proxy file that editors can get their hands on right away and start to cut creatively. But usually by the time everyone wakes up, we're in possession of the camera raw. So the stakeholders can actually look at the real product, right, which is camera raw. That means you can stretch it, you can zoom in, you can resize it. And just as a side note, one of the benefits of 8K versus 4K is it's just like a bigger palette. Right. So let's say you shoot in 8K, you can reframe any part of that. Yeah. You can redirect the scene. So you don't have to worry about like where the humans are and where the car crashed into the wall. You can reframe it. 4K allows you some of those benefits, but from a visual standpoint, sorry for this digression, I can't help it. From an imaging perspective, most of the people that concern themselves with motion or image capture do agree that high dynamic range does something more to a person than merely 4K or 8K. There's more bit depth, there's more light, there's more black. So just if everyone heard HDR, a lot of people believe HDR is meaningful and will become more and more popular, especially with the LG OLED monitors, where Beautiful. HDR comes standard. It's under $1,500. We use those monitors in a professional capacity, but you can buy them now from Best Buys or whatnot. So was that schizophrenic enough?
No, that's great. I think with people, but I'm assuming there's no questions because I don't see anybody with a hand up. So Dave, in terms of your challenges, like what do you wish the community would solve for you?
I don't want to recycle those points, but that is one of the biggest stressors at this point is getting connectivity to last mile locations, whether it's Fiji or it's downtown Los Angeles. Today, there are a few companies that specialize in getting that connectivity, no matter where it is. Some of you in the room may have heard of SohoNet as an example. I'm sure you know SohoNet quite well.
Yes.
Their job is figuring out this production stuff because quite commonly, many of these places that do, sound mixing, they do, image post, they do basically everything to do with getting a piece of content out the door, don't have advanced technical staff on staff that do anything other than understand how to support these machines that are editing sound or video. They don't understand networks, and it doesn't behoove them to hire someone full-time just to deal with networks. So what we hope to do is make that easier for them, especially given how much content we're producing. We want to make that path from, again, script to screen easier to get. We're still doing our transcoding in AWS, for example, but getting that content to AWS to transcode it from some post-production houses is a major hassle.
Is that typically like a wireline network or something like AWS Snowball to just carry the drives over?
It can be either. It depends on where that post house is. So sometimes you want to do post in, you're doing post in Los Angeles for a project that's happening in Prague. Or sometimes you might decide to do post locally in a trailer or in some business park in Prague. And you need to get that back from a place that's not normally well connected in that area to the internet to something. And exactly to his point, one of our hopes is to get that mostly done over IP, mostly done over the internet. But we also want to leverage, things like dark fiber and waves and stuff like that as much as we can, and take away some of the temporary nature of those networks, because that's what drives a lot of the cost. People will order, a 10 gig wave to a location, have it there for 3 months during a production, and then tear it down. It's actually really expensive long term. It seems like it's cheaper, but because there's no unified infrastructure around how this stuff works, they don't want to leave it because they may not be the ones to use that stage next time, or they may not be talking to the same post house next time. So putting some network in the middle, and that's something that we're really thinking about what the best ways to do that are.
So I have another question. Anybody from the audience have any questions over here? This is like a rare opportunity to chat to these guys. Yes, is that Renee? Okay.
Would it be valuable to have like modular data centers, possibly almost like those teleports in specific regions where you do a lot of filming, that would have all those resources together and could be almost like a service that could provide the needs that you have, that know your language, and then that's just like a network for you to leverage?
We've discussed similar things to that. One of the biggest problems in those locations is power availability and connectivity availability. And so what we don't want to do is provide more requirements for specialized infrastructure on site, whether that be, even if it is all in one, to your point, even if it is a semi or it's a shipping container full of tech. What we would much rather do is get that to a more regional location that you can then you can store, you can do whatever you need to do, within a few hundred miles of where that production is happening, versus trying to get infrastructure on location at each production.
Yeah, we've found over the last 3 years in particular that any given urban area where production happens, there are plenty of last mile providers and ISP options. The challenge is to speak with them and have them understand how we work. For example, when we meet one of these companies for the first time, they want to do a multi-year service contract. And we're like, well, the production only lasts for 6 months, but they want to do like a 1 or 2 or 3 year service contract. Well, we don't work like that. We would need a burstable service, and we'll pay you money, right? We will include that in the line item budget for any given TV or film production. What's ironic is there's a lot of money out there right now because there's more television production going on right now than in the history of television. In fact, 50% of our clientele are feature film people that are gravitating to television. I mean, back in the day, I think I told you, to work on television was kind of like, oh, you work on TV. How sad. Now it's like the center of, now the center of gravity is TV, and there's a ton of it, but there's still this like vocabulary and understanding each other issue. Plenty of last mile providers in Vancouver, North Carolina, Georgia, New York, Los Angeles, all these places, but it's just developing those relationships. So what we've done is once we meet someone, we go, okay, that company is cool. We note them. So the next time another production is there, we re-engage that relationship. Yeah. And we have them in a database. And that's not technical, that's building relationships.
And you have a lot of, just to add to that, on these locations, one of the things is TV production is not really, or production in general, is not really seasonal to that much of an extent, but you do have a lot of variability in production schedules and how many things you're doing in parallel. And so you don't want to create a situation where you need a bunch of specialized infrastructure to support on that location. The more aggregation you can get together, instead of having to have a network engineer and a storage engineer and whatever at each production, the closer you can get that where you can share that infrastructure, the better that will scale.
So one question for both of you, because we're just about out of time. Bandersnatch.
Yes.
Sort of a new development, saying we went from DVDs to streaming, so now sort of interactive, participative video. Mm-hmm. Other user-generated content and models, like for example, I've seen one where the idea is everyone has a cell phone at a major sporting event and they're filming, but you can do dynamic switching, so you can change point of view just like bullet time in the Matrix, so you can see the play or the crowd from any angle. There's new things coming down the pike. What are you both thinking, or if there's anything you can discuss about implications for network architecture or user experience or anything else in either of those?
Bandersnatch was super cool. I don't know if I'm assuming you watched it if you brought it up. No?
My daughter has seen it. We tried to load it on the big TV and it didn't work, so needed to go to a different smart TV, and then I flew out here, so it didn't work. But the concept is that you choose, we did some of it, so you choose these scenes, and some things lead to dead ends, others loop back, and so it's almost like you're doing a maze and watching video at the same time.
Right, it's a choose your own adventure type story, right? Which I think is super cool. I don't think that's the future of content, in that I don't think you're going to see that replace traditional media. I think that is an evolution of, here's another tool in the toolbox that someone can use. And we've had tons of reach outs from people making content since Bandersnatch going, oh my God, I've got this great idea for how I can use that. But it's not going to replace movies, it's not going to replace TV shows.
Still be more sit back
and it took a lot of convincing, like, when we thought about this. It took a lot of convincing to get, I forget his name, the producer of Black Mirror, anyway, over the hump of agreeing to do it. And then he went away and wasn't going to do it. He went away and he thought about it and came back and was like, all right, I've got it. And I think that's super cool, and I think that has opened up new doors. The cool thing is, though, most of that's using a lot of the technology that's already developed.
But you can imagine like the next level or the level beyond that, right? Where I'm participating in a movie, it's doing screen capture and then compositing
today in our
so
low attention span society, to your point of why TV is more popular than ever, because people like to snack on this stuff more than they want.
I'm sorry, did you say something?
I actually forgot what I was talking about.
Right.
But anyway, go ahead.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you very much. We're out of time, so great discussion. And you guys are semi-around, maybe, if someone wants to catch you and follow up. All right, please join me in giving a hand for just this fantastic group. Thank you.
Great. Yeah.